What was your rank when you left?
I was an aviation machinist mate, 2nd class.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Why?
My dad was a World War I veteran, and he warned me about getting involved with the Army and how hard it was for him during that war. So he said the best thing to do is to get into the Navy. At least if you get involved, you go down with the ship, but you live like a man until you do go down.
Where were you living at the time?
In New Britain, Connecticut. And working at the aircraft.
You were working at
Pratt & Whitney aircraft.
at the time that you enlisted?
Yes, I had a very unusual account of my enlistment. I wanted to enlist into the Navy, but they closed enlistments for a while, feeling that all the best personnel was going into the Navy and the Marine Corps, and the Army wasn't getting any. So I worked the 3rd shift at the aircraft, and when I went to work one Sunday night, there was another man from New Britain that was interested in joining the Navy. He says, "Joe, they opened up enlistments in the Navy on the 15th January, and this was the 16th, Sunday night. So after work, instead of going back home to New Britain, we went to the Hartford post office, and we both enlisted. As it happened, we were sworn in, we went down to New Haven, got our physicals, and I wound up at Newport, Rhode Island. Monday evening, I had to call my mother up and tell her where I was at, because I didn't get home from work."
What year was this?
1943
probably.
or 44. You got
I've
the...
got your papers, we'll check it. But this was January 16th?
Yes.
So what'd your mother have to say?
You didn't come home, so I had to send my badge home. A friend of mine took it back into the plant and then informed him that I wasn't coming back. And the reason for my... it was a good circumstance that in the Navy, when they found I was a former aircraft employee, they directed my activity towards aircraft training, which I went to the Naval Air Technical Training Center in Memphis, Tennessee, after boot camp.
So, once you got inducted, had your physical, you didn't go home in between? You just
No,
took right
not until
off?
after boot camp.
What did your mother say when you called her to tell her?
Well, she knew that I wanted to avoid the Army at all costs because of what it did to my dad. And it left a bad taste in the family. He was an immigrant, and he was in the Yankee Division, and subsequently he didn't take advantage of all the benefits he had. He was gassed and in the hospital when armistice was declared. And when during the Depression, when we were hard up for money, we tried to get some of his service-connected disabilities. We applied for it, and the Army had no record of his being hospitalized. It was a field hospital. So he never fought it. He never realized that he could get 2 or 3 other men from the same outfit to sign affidavits. Yes, it was so. Well, it's a long story of being unintelligent, and whoops, the light went out. Oh no, it's still on. I thought.
So I rolled on it.
Yeah. So
your mother was glad, actually, then that you
yes.
were in the Navy and not the Army.
Right.
Do you remember your first days in service? What happened to you immediately after being inducted?
Well, boot camp at Newport, Rhode Island.
You did your boot camp at Newport?
Yes.
What was that like?
It was good. I liked it. Met different friends. I had a good time in our common misery. It was good. I enjoyed it because I worked the 3rd shift. Here I was going to be a normal man again, up during the day and sleep at night. And it worked out fine. Then when I got assigned to the Naval Air Technical Training Center at Memphis, Tennessee, it was great. I went through an A&E course. It's aircraft and mechanic. Wireless school. It was 21 weeks long.
That was in Tennessee?
Yes.
How long was boot camp?
From January until March or April. 3 months, 2 months.
You went right from boot camp to Tennessee
Yeah.
and took this A&E course?
Yep.
And how long was that?
21 weeks. And then after the 21 weeks, we had 3 weeks of radar and aerial gunnery. I volunteered to be an aerial gunner.
What did they teach you in the A&E course?
The commercial maintenance of aircraft, engine work and aircraft work. It involved enough training that we were eligible for A&E licenses to work on commercial aircraft if we wanted to.
So were you being trained to be an airplane mechanic?
Yes.
Did they choose you to do that because of your experience at Pratt & Whitney?
I believe so.
Did your experience at Pratt & Whitney help you? Did you already know a lot of the stuff?
Yes. It introduced me into servicing aircraft, flight aircraft.
And did you volunteer to be a gunner, or is that...
Yes, I did.
Which position on the airplane?
My training in the Banana River, after Memphis, we went down the Banana River to get operational training in the PBMs. My station was the flight engineer.
Where's Banana River?
Florida. Melbourne, O'Galley.
And what's a PBM?
PBM, Martin Mariner.
That's the name of it?
Yes.
Martin Mariner?
Yes.
Is that a specific kind of airplane?
It is, insofar as it's strictly a seaplane.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it was a wonderful workhorse. It took the place of the PBYs during World War II. We relieved the PBYs that were in Australia and in the Philippines with these Martin Mariners. The aircraft was unique. It had a 118-foot wingspan. It had an 85-foot fuselage, and it was the largest twin-engine aircraft flying at that time.
And that's what you were trained to service?
Yes.
As a flight engineer, what would your responsibilities be?
They were to be aware of the fuel capacity. We had control of all the engine indicators. The flight engineer had a panel. He sat in front of that panel and he observed the temperatures, the fuel consumption, the bomb load, whatever. The aircraft flight instruments and flight control was up forward for the pilots. They had no engine controls. They were all aft with the flight engineer. It was quite a job.
Wow. Where did you go after your training at Banana River?
We went up to Hedron, Norfolk, and got assigned to the squadron, VPB 25.
VPB?
That's right. P as in Paul, B as in Baker.
What does VPB stand for?
Patrol plane bomber.
Patrol plane. And that's when you first hooked up with your squad?
Yes, we were assigned crews and picked up our pilots and had operational training out of North Carolina. And then we, after training, we flew cross-country in these seaplanes and landed at Eagle Mountain Lake, Texas.
What did you do in Texas?
It was just a refueling hop to continue our journeys out to the West Coast.
At this point, did you know where you were going?
No, other than we were assigned to the Calm Air West Coast from the East Coast, and once we landed in San Diego, then we went up to Alameda, and then Alameda we got our debarkation papers to go to Hawaii.
Did you have a chance to go home before all this?
Yes, after boot camp and before school.
So then you went to Hawaii by ship or by plane?
The planes were so loaded, some of the crew went by ship. I was the portion that went by ship. And the balance of the crew flew the planes over.
How was the ship ride over to Hawaii?
Well, we went over on an aircraft carrier. It was first class. We had a very unusual occurrence happen as we were approaching Pearl Harbor. Some F-6Fs came down and flat-hatted our carrier that we were on, and one of the F-6Fs got caught in the prop wash of the one in front of him, and he plunged right in head first, right in front of us, and down he went. And we said, boy, this is quite an entrance to Hawaii and what we were in for. It was unusual, and once we landed in Pearl Harbor, we were instructed to put on our dress blues. Why, I don't know, because it was hotter than hell. And we went from Pearl Harbor to Kaneohe Bay, which was across the island to where the seaplanes were.
And what did you do there?
We were outfitted for going further overseas. And they painted our planes black, and we had a departure mass for the Catholics, and we were prepping up to go into the forward area. And from Kaneohe Bay, we took off for Johnston Island.
Where's Johnston Island?
Out in the mid-Pacific.
How long did you stay in Hawaii just getting prepared to leave?
About 5 or 6 weeks.
Okay, so then you flew to Johnston Island with your entire crew?
Yes. And that was only part of the trip, because from Johnston we flew to Kwajalein. Then from Kwajalein we flew to Manus. And from Manus we flew up to Wewak. And then from Wewak we went into Lady Gulf. That's where the fun began.
Man, so you already had a lot of flying time in before you even got to action. When you went to all these places in between, Johnston Island to Kwajalein to Wewak, did you stop and was it just for refueling purposes?
Refueling, just refueling.
So you didn't get a chance to see any of these islands?
No, we didn't tour.
Other than to fuel your airplane and take off again. And then you finally ended up at Lady Gulf?
Yes.
That's in the Philippines?
Yes.
And is that where you were stationed?
Yes, we operated between our ships were anchored between the Voice of Freedom, the Apache, and subsequently the Japanese used to home in on the Voice of Freedom because they had a radio signal, and we all had to scatter, and we did. And after the first few nights at Lady and all the fireworks and the action, the safest place to sleep was aboard the plane and not aboard the ship, because we had bunks in the plane. You know,
Where was the plane?
They were moored. They were anchored on. They were anchored in the harbor, away from the ships.
Oh, all right, because these were seaplanes?
Seaplanes.
The planes are actually anchored like a boat in the water?
Well, they had buoys set up, and we could attach our ships to the buoy and stay there.
So your ship was attached to your airplane, but the airplane...
No, the airplane was attached to the buoy. The ship, they scattered, they dispersed.
So how did you get to your airplane?
Well, they had patrol plane tenders, boats, small boats that ferried us from ship to plane to ship, whatever.
So you would get your taxi ride out to your
Yeah,
airplane and
right.
then sleep in there, the whole crew?
Most of it. The pilots had plush quarters aboard the ship. We didn't.
That must have been pretty cramped for sleeping.
No, we had 4 bunks, and what they called is that part of our duty was the anchor watch. We were there in case the plane drifted away or broke the mooring or whatever, we would reattach it.
Did that ever happen?
No, no. The after Lady, we've seen quite a bit of action, and we went ashore. In fact, I have a memento there, if I may get up for a minute.
Sure. All right, so you have a memento from...
Lady Island. While we were anchored there and waiting for our various patrols, we went ashore. And when we went ashore, we found a Japanese ammo dump. And there was a man from the Army that was knowledgeable. He showed us how to disarm these hand grenades. So we took the powder out of them and took the generator off of it. This is what starts the blast.
That's a Japanese hand grenade?
Yes. And it's inactive. Obviously, I can't have a live one. So this was my memento from Lady. And while operating from Lady, we went ashore, and some of the crews went inland, and the further inland you went, the greater the stench came, because the Japanese people weren't buried. You know, it was awful. And I didn't like the smell of things, and I didn't wish to go any further for any souvenirs. But one of our people went in, and he got nicked by a Japanese sniper. He went so far inland. He went further than he was supposed to go. In fact, none of us were supposed to be ashore. And when he came back to the ship, the skipper had a dilemma. He says, "Look, you're eligible for a Purple Heart, but I can't say that you were ashore without permission. Actually, you're AOL." He says, the kid said, "Well, I don't want the Purple Heart, just forget it," you know. And they didn't offer him the Purple Heart for having been wounded. But we weren't there that long, because then we flew from there to Mindanao, and that's where our ships went ahead of us, the 2 tenders, and they dropped the buoys for us. And when we landed at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we anchored to the buoys, and the the tenders came. They picked up the crew. I stayed aboard the ship because I didn't care going aboard the tender, because it was loaded with gasoline and we were in the forward area. Well, anyhow, at about 4 o'clock, GQ is sounded, and all hell breaks loose. They're firing guns all over the place, and a Zero, or a kamikaze, came over the island. He dropped a 500-pounder off the fantail of the Half Moon, and he straightened out, and he went into an LST that was a PT tender, and he hit it, and a lot of action. The ships left us, and we were out there, and that night, the same night, we were aboard the plane, and there was a crew next, because they generated a semi-arc of buoys where all our planes were moored. There was a lot of yelling, and we got up, and the ship that was hit, the tide came in and refloated it, and it was floating through our planes, abandoned. So we fended off our planes, and we tried to raise our ships, and it was silent. They wouldn't answer, because being in a forward area like that, they didn't want to, obviously it was security, so the next one wouldn't come and find them. So the next morning we got picked up, and we fended off this ship, and another crew went up and they anchored the ship, and then we commenced our patrols of the South China Sea.
Joe, can you give us a little bit of a description of what your VPB crew would be? Like how many men and what were the positions or jobs that they had?
Yes, it consisted of 11 men, 3 officers, and 8 enlisted men. There was a patrol plane commander, the PCC, and he had a lesser grade, a lieutenant junior grade a co-pilot, and then we had 2 radio men, 3 ordnance men, 3 mechanics.
Were you with the same crew the whole time you were overseas, or did the crews change?
We were the same crew.
So you got to be pretty close then.
We were too close, because I flew with the squadron commander, and there is also a little embitterment that he chose his missions, like the mission to pick up these 2 Japanese prisoners. He chose that, and we went and we picked them up. The others were routine patrols from Mindanao to French Indochina and back to cut off the South China Sea shipping from Singapore up to Japan. And our duties were to find the ships, if there were any, and report them. And the same sectors that we patrolled, our American submarines patrolled the same sectors. And they would go after the ship. We would not go in on the ships. But one of our planes broke down on the French Indochina coast, and they had a ditch. And that crew, they had quite an experience. There were 11 men in that crew, and we went searching for them. We couldn't find them. And well, what happened is we were told that if we ever ditched in French Indochina was to contact the French underground and the 20th Air Force, which was inland. And what happened was there was 3 radio men that had some high school French, and they encountered a person that got them back on board a raft, and they contacted the sub, and they were picked up, the 3 of them. And the rest were left in China, and eventually they were picked up by the Japanese, and they were all except one was executed. And we didn't get this backfeed because we were in the forward area. This all happened in the back area, and until after the war ended, we found out what happened to him and why it happened, and how there was one man that was left alive, and he was left alive because he was a tall Oklahoman or Nebraskan, I don't know which. And what they did is the Japanese paraded him through the villages, the American prisoner, you know, the enemy. And he eventually got freed, and it happens that the crew that the Japanese that executed the crews were eventually picked up, and they had a war crimes trial, and they were hung, and all that good stuff. And this one gentleman that was a survivor was on one of our squadron reunions. He was in the process of writing a novel about his experiences, and I checked back recently to see if I didn't make the last reunion. They're always on the West Coast or down south, and let's face it, we're all getting younger, and it's a chore to make the effort to do it. But hopefully, I hope to make the next one, and I hope to read his account.
What was his name, do you know?
Yeah, it's in the paperwork there.
All right, I'll check that out. Do you know if he wrote the book?
Do I know he wrote the book?
Did he write it yet?
He was in the process of one of our reunions. That's why I checked back with the man who conducts these reunions, Josephson. I called him, and he said, "Joe, it's in print, but it hasn't been released."
All right, so when you were, after you went to the South China Sea Patrol, how long did you stay in that area patrolling the South China Sea?
It's in my log.
Was it more like months or years or weeks?
If you don't mind, pass it up.
I can check it later.
Check the log. The log has
The
entries.
exact dates?
Yes,
Okay. Oh, in fact,
the flight log.
there, attached to this record is Joe's actual flight log from when he was in service. Copies will be submitted to the Library of Congress. Joe, what would be a typical day like when you were on patrol?
Up at the break of dawn, taking off, and flying for, I guess it took about 6 hours from the Philippines to French Indochina, and 6 hours back. It was a 12-hour hop, going and coming. Then we landed, and we had our flight rations, and our plane flew at about 5,000 feet. It was a reconnaissance flight, looking for shipping, and that was about it. At various times we would take various sectors. They pike cut various sectors of the South China Sea where we flew back and forth.
How often would you fly? Every day?
Every third or fourth day. You can check that on the flight log too. Be more specific.
How many airplanes would fly in a formation? You know, like in the Air Force when they have those big formations, did you fly with a group of planes or by yourself?
By ourselves.
You one only
We had to,
airplane
yes.
by yourself?
Yes, because we had to be careful that when we flew back to Mindanao, to our home base, we had to watch that we didn't pick up a Japanese fighter coming in on our IFF and then taking off and dive bombing into the ships, because we would, our home port was where if he knocked off a tender, he knocks off the entire squadron. You know, our fuel, everything else was tied in with the tender. So their objective, the Japanese objective, was not to get us as a single plane, but to try to get the tender. And it was hazardous insofar as the waters we were taking off from and landing weren't even charted, and one of our planes hit what it called? Not an atoll, but underwater sea growth.
Reef?
Reef, right. They hit a reef. They caught on fire, and that plane burned right there. And we were taking off that same day, and we said, "Holy mackerel!" The waters weren't charted, and we had to be extra sensitive as to where we landed and where we took off, because reefs prevail throughout the ocean. So apparently that was one of the reasons for our making so many missions made us eligible for the DFC, the Distinguished Flying Cross.
How many planes were tendered by one ship?
We had, I think it was, geez, I'm guessing now because
What's that, a ballpark figure?
I would say about 12.
And what was the name of the ship that tendered your plane?
The USS Half Moon. Supplies from Australia. The other half of the squadron had the USS San Pablo. It took 2 tenders to tender one squadron.
And you had spoke a little bit before we were on camera about your supplies from Australia. How did you like being tendered by Australian supplies?
Very edible. We sort of resented it because half the crews were getting stateside supplies and we were getting Australian supplies.
You couldn't swap things, huh?
Well,
They weren't likely to.
well, they weren't, but what happened is most of us were going to the San Pablo for our meals, and they started to complain they didn't have enough food prepped up.
Do you have any memorable experiences that you can recall while you were stationed overseas?
What do you mean by memorable?
Any missions that you were on? Any combat missions? Any?
Well, the patrol missions were considered combat, I guess, and that one mission where we picked up the Japanese prisoners.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we had fighter escort for about an hour or so, and then they ran out of fuel, and we had to conduct the rest of the flight, which was about 4 hours long. I believe it was Zamboanga, where we landed to a signal fire, and once again it was hazardous because we weren't aware of the ocean and how deep it was and how shallow it may have been, or what coral may have existed, and that was a memorable hop because we were told to keep everything quiet. We couldn't even discuss it with our other squadron members.
Did you know what your mission was?
No, we didn't. We found out after we picked up the prisoners.
So you were flying to this location to pick up 2 Japanese prisoners?
Yes, with several Philippine guerrillas.
And then you had to transport them back
to Leyte. And they were used, so-called, for interrogation. The Navy report, which you have for that Gold Star for in lieu of a second air medal, has a little more detail about the mission.
So you picked them up and brought them back?
Yes.
So they were actually in the plane with you?
Yes. They were docile. They were prisoners. They were, actually, I think they were deserters and they were picked up by the guerrillas. And the guerrillas kept them, they didn't kill them.
Did you have much contact with the Filipino people while you were there?
Only in trading for food or fruit. And when they used to paddle up to our ships. We had to be careful because for a while there were Japanese swimming up to the ships and tossing in hand grenades. So who came and it was a little jumpy. Then we wound up carrying MacArthur's personal envoy from various places. And he was a chief warrant officer in the Army. And every time we picked him up, he was bombed. He used to sing, "Stick with back and never get back," and all that. And he was quite a guy. We had him for 1 or 3 hops and picked him up and dropped him off. And that was a little unusual. And we were a service organization for the fleet, carrying mail and all that good stuff to various advanced areas, because after Mindanao we moved up to Subic Bay and we had operations out of there. We were already at the end of our term of being overseas. We were on our way to get relieved. or 18 months, and in the meantime, some of our crew members put in for flight training. They got it, and they got shipped to the States, so hell, I put in for that too. I put in for flight training, got accepted, and waiting for my turn in school, which never appeared because I had a chance to accumulate enough points for. See, when we came back from the forward area, we left our plane there. It was picked up by another crew. We flew back to Hawaii, and while in Hawaii, we were waiting for transportation to statesides. The war was still going on, and we weren't in any hurry to get back stateside. So we opted for a week recreational leave at the Royal Hawaiian, which we took. And we took that leave, the enlisted personnel, and then we had a grand time. And then we got back to our receiving station, and we're waiting for transportation back to the States. And in this receiving station, there are people coming and going, and they're leaving, and we're waiting and waiting and waiting. So finally, I got a hold of one of our chiefs. I says, for Christ's sakes, go out there and find out, ask the skipper, what are we waiting for? And while we were up there waiting, VJ Day was declared. I says, holy shit, we could have been in the States. And here we are in Hawaii. They're shooting off all kinds of ammunition. We finally, what happened is he was waiting for A1 transportation, which was a carrier. We finally found the carrier to go back to Alameda. We go back to Alameda. San Francisco is out of bounds. The Navy ripped Frisco apart during VJ Day. Here we are. We just come back from the Philippines, the forward area, and we couldn't even go ashore. So the hell with this, let's go home. So we got flights to the East Coast to get our 30-day leave, and we took that, and we got back to home, and we got reassigned under Comair West Coast, and I put in for duty in Seattle. I was familiar with Alameda, I was familiar with San Diego, and I thought I'd go to a place that I wasn't familiar with. Well, anyhow, I wind up after my home leave to go to Seattle. I go to Seattle, they put me on a bus, and I take a 2-hour hop up to Whidbey Island. It's in Puget Sound, to run patrols from Whidbey Island out. They used to run patrols for subs. And it was at that point that we were awarded our DFCs at Whidbey Island, got enough points for discharge, so I put in for a discharge.
You had 2 Distinguished Flying Cross?
One. 2 air medals. 1 air medal and the Gold Star in lieu of a second.
All right, back in the Philippines, how did you stay in touch with family?
V-mail. We had those emails during the war, and letters.
Can you explain what a V-mail is?
It was a photographed copy of your mail that was miniaturized, folded up, and forwarded to the family. I don't think I have any copies left.
What was the food like?
Good. The Navy food was great. Flight rations were good because it was stateside rations, not
Not the Australian?
Not the Australian. Yeah.
Did you have enough supplies and resources of the materials that you needed? Were there any shortages?
No.
Did you feel any pressure or stress when you were in the Philippines?
Not at all. Too young.
Was there anything special that you did for good luck?
Pray.
What did people do for entertainment?
We had USOs when we were stationed ashore. We were stationed ashore in the Philippines, and Oklahoma was a production put on by the USO, and we went to see it, and we had our binoculars from the aircraft, and it was quite impressive. It was the first time that we seen an American troupe perform a musical. It was great. It was really a great show. Other forms of entertainment was motion pictures.
How often did you get to see movies?
Oh, about once a week, depending if we were ashore. See, we were always in transit. We were like gypsies. We either operated from the ship, which went to a forward area, or we operated from a back area, which was a shore station, and we had Quonset huts at the shore stations, and no permanent quarters.
So how often would you be moving? Like every week, every month, every...
Well, every time there was a forward engagement with a movement of the fleet, we had to go ashore to give them time to get there. And once they moored and anchored, then we would fly in.
Join them?
Yes.
Do you recall any of the USO celebrities? Did you have any celebrities that came?
No, I can't recall who they were.
You didn't get Bob Hope or anybody?
No, no. I think the one that played in Oklahoma, the short man, what the hell was his name? He played it for a while and he made a motion picture. He was the only one, but of course he was 2 miles away on the stage. We were back in the...
You could see him from 2 miles away?
Well, we had binoculars.
You could watch the show from 2 miles away?
Yes. It was a humongous amphitheater. There was a, you know, it was for the fleet. The entire fleet, more or less, was there to watch it.
How good could you see?
Well, with the binoculars, you could really draw them up. Yeah.
Really?
The music was great.
How could you hear them? The loudspeakers?
Yes, yes.
And you said you went on leave. Was your only leave that one time in Hawaii on your way home?
Yes.
No other R&R while you were overseas?
No.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
Well, the beer parties ended up humorous and unusual.
Could you describe one of your beer parties?
Well, we used to have to go across the bay in our patrol plane tenders, and we only had a crew of 8, and one of our officers came with us, and he would assign a chet for about 8 or 16 cases of beer. So by the time we got back to our station on the board, when we used to drink it all, you weren't allowed to drink it aboard the station. So we used to drink it aboard that patrol plane tender. One of the men got intoxicated to a point where he poured beer over the ignition system, shorted it out. The coxswain blew his top. He was going to throw us overboard. He had to dry it up, and we restarted, and we proceeded back to station. Our officer was with us, but no, that was one incident.
Where was it that you went to get all this beer?
At a fleet rec park called San Jose. It was a rec park for all the fleet used to pull in, and they all would get their portion of beer, 3 beers apiece.
Was this American beer that
Yes,
they shipped over?
yeah.
How often did you have these beer parties?
Oh, not too often, because once again we were in transit. I think if twice it was a lot.
Did guys play pranks on each other?
No.
No joking around?
No, it was too, we all had our stations on the plane, and the radio men were interested with their end of it, with the radio contacts and the radar, and the ordnance men with the gunnery, the mechs with the flight engineers uh, station where we used to have to record all our uh, functions. Uh, it led to my requesting a request when I got back to the aircraft after the war to go out to the hangar because they had flight observers. When they had flight observers and having all this experience at the flight panel and recording, I thought I'd be a suitable employee. So I got transferred from production out to the experimental hangar, and it was great. My naval services contributed to my getting transferred from production out to the experimental hangar, and I loved it. I was an all-around machinist, and I seen what the flight observers did for the our flight tests out of East Hartford. And what they consisted of was, they didn't consist of a manual logging of instrumentation. They consisted of photographic copying of the instruments. And the engineers used to dissect the instrumentation, the photographed data for their own uses and purposes. And I felt that wasn't for me. I couldn't see getting involved there. So I stayed with the shop, and I wound up being a process planner. And it's writing work instructions for the shop. And it was great. It was so great that I put in 44 years there.
Wow.
Well, they counted my service time.
Oh, that was great. What did you think of your fellow soldiers and officers?
They were good. They didn't fraternize too much with the enlisted personnel, and we had nothing in common with them, actually. We, let's say, tolerated them, or they tolerated us. You know, in the flight crew, we all took turns doing everything. We took turns landing the plane, we took turns taking off, and they were good.
Did you stay in touch with any other members of the flight crew after the war?
No, sadly no.
Do you recall the last day you were in service?
Yeah, it was in Brooklyn, New York.
You were discharged from Brooklyn, New York?
Yeah.
How did you get from the Puget Sound to Brooklyn?
By train.
Do we have a naval base in Brooklyn?
No, it was a receiving station.
Oh.
Then from Brooklyn I came home.
Had you considered at all staying in the military?
Yes, because upon discharge, the officer read my jacket, and he said, "Joe," he says, "you're in for flight training." He says, "Why don't you stay in the service and take the flight training?" He says, even if you wash out, you become a line officer. He says, "What are you going to do when you go back?" Well, I says, "I don't know. I thought maybe I'd go and try for a flight engineer's job on Pan Am." They had flight engineers on their clipper ships. And he says, I didn't realize the opportunity I would have when I went back to the aircraft, which was good. And I said, "Well, I'll go back to the shop." He says, "Well," he says, "you should really consider it." He says, "It's on record, and you're eligible, and take it." But I decided I'd be a feather merchant. And the Navy is good, but they work with the class system, and the system being seniority, which is all right. And when we got assigned in Norfolk, the first and second class sailors were from the South, and they were Southern boys, and we were all Northern kids that went through operational training, went through school and all that, and we didn't expect getting rebels to be our so-called supervisors. So I felt, well, that's the Navy way of doing things. Being a feather merchant, I'm in during the war was ended, you know, the VJ Day was declared. I didn't feel my services were required, even though I had the opportunity to go to school.
What was flight training? That to be a pilot?
Yeah.
What did you do in the days and the weeks immediately after you got out of the service?
Went to East Hartford.
Is that where you were living then?
No, I was living in New Britain, but I went to pick up my old job.
Oh. And when you went back to Pratt & Whitney, they gave you your job back right away?
Yeah.
Then
Yes.
you went back home to New Britain?
Yes.
Did you go to school at all in the GI Bill after the war?
No.
Did you make any close friendships while you were in the service?
Yes. Eddie Norton, who was up in New Hampshire. Jim Trustahowitz, who was in up in he went to work for Yukon, and Jimmy is in Willimantic, and Josephson, the radio man that was in my training class at Banana River, and the one that runs the squadron reunions. I keep in contact with him. He has our squadron mailing list.
Did you stay in touch with those guys after the war?
I did with Jimmy Trustahowitz and Eddie Norton and Josephson.
And you're still in touch with them today?
Not routinely, just like
For reunions?
reunions.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
I joined a VFW here in Wethersfield.
You know what post number that is?
Yeah, oh boy.
That's all right.
I don't go to any of their meetings, but there's not many people that attend it. Oh, here it is. I'll give you the post number.
When did you join the Wethersfield VFW?
Oh, about 5-6 years ago. Where the hell's the number?
That's all right.
This is a renewal. Oh. It's a renewal. I don't have the
That's
post
all
number.
right. But your career after the war, well, how did you get, now you're in the Wethersfield now, but you went back to New Britain?
Yes.
And you went back to Pratt & Whitney, and they counted your time in the service. And you ended up as the process planner.
Yep.
Did you get married?
Yes. Got married, had a youngster.
You had one child?
Yes.
Girl or boy?
A boy. Mark, he's still living with me. After my wife died about 5 years ago, I wanted to get out, but he's in love with the town. I don't know why, but youth will be served.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Oh, yes.
How?
It's horrible. It's... people don't realize how horrible it is until you have a first-hand view of going into a forward area and seeing bodies decaying and strewn about, and the magnitude of and the intensity of the whole drama of this damn war. It's pathetic. My dad was an anti-militarist because of his exposure during World War I, and I became one after World War II because it doesn't resolve anything. It's sad to say that During World War I, it was to make the world safe for democracy. World War II, I don't know, the popular slogan was what? I don't know, I've forgotten what the hell it was. But it's so useless. And it's so final, like this Iran business. My personal feeling is not one American boy is worth what they're doing out there. I mean, you tell that to the mother, the parents. And I'm finding a similar story going on now with the Mexicans, joining the American Army for what? Getting a citizenship. My dad did the same damn thing in World War I. He was an immigrant from Poland. He didn't want to wait 6 years to get a citizenship. He enlisted in the National Guard. Well, that was 1912. 1914, they federalized the National Guard. He was in the Yankee Division. What for? Just to become an American citizen. These Mexicans are doing the same thing. And these unemployed Southern guys, why are they in the service? They can't get jobs. But then no one ever beats that drum. So it's quite an undertaking. And it's just not fair for those kids that aren't knowledgeable enough and they don't know about citizenship and what's involved and what risks they're at when they get into it. Like the people in the National Guard. Well, my personal opinion is they're in it to double dip. They were getting paid plus having their own jobs. And I don't subscribe to people that more luck form, but the double dippers, I resent it. They have a career in a certain place, follow it. If you want a military career, good, follow it. Don't be half military, half civilian. But that's for the cause to be. I've had my turn in the barrel, and I'm lucky I come out of it, and I'm satisfied.
Do you have any reunions of your unit?
Yes. Well, the squadron reunions.
How often do they have reunions?
Every 3 or 4 years.
Have you attended any?
I've attended 2. What years? Way back. I didn't attend the last one.
Because it was too far away?
Yes, they usually have them on a West Coast or out in what's the large naval base in Pensacola. And the thing is, the PBMs, the Martin Mariner, is an obsolete World War II plane, and there's none in existence.
Not a single one?
Not a single one.
What happened to all of them?
Unfortunately, it was strictly a seaplane. And subsequently, it didn't have a home base on land. They either sunk them or whatever. But that's why I got that model downstairs. And like I say, I just built a box, an acrylic box to cover it, and then I'll put these service awards in the same box.
Did you have a name for your PBM that you flew?
Yes, it was Pickle 1.
Pickle 1. Do you know how it got that name?
No. We had a lieutenant, Jacobs, he was Jewish, and all of us used to love to hear him announce the arrival when we came back home, announcing Pickle 1 to come in. It was a pickle, all right.
Are you involved at all with the activities of your VFW post?
No, don't really have time for it. And the membership, I get a letter, and it's diminishing with all the, like I belong to the St. Cyril's Men's Club, and I belong to the Sacred Heart card playing group, and it's all going downhill. and there's no replacements, which we served our time, and I guess it's time to phase out.
How did your service and your experiences affect your life?
In a positive manner.
In what way?
Well, it wasn't all doom and gloom. We had our good times. We had our camaraderie, relationships with other men, same age group, same activities. On the scale of 1 to 10, it was a 8 or a 9. I liked it. I liked the military.
It actually furthered your knowledge in your career field.
It did. Circumstances. It wasn't that I planned it. No, it worked out well in my employment. It worked out well in my relationship with the service. A lot better than my dad, and it was an eye-opener.
Did you ever fly again after you got out of the service?
Oh yes, I worked out in the experimental hangar, and one of the men had an aircraft at Brainerd, and I went up for a hop with him. And I have nieces and nephews all over hell and back. We've flown out to the West Coast several times. I've flown out to Poland, out to Europe. When I was a skier, I flew out with the Connecticut Ski Council to Europe, skied for 3 weeks. All the areas I skied are there on the board, and my employment buttons are there on the board.
You were always a passenger or a flight engineer on those?
Well, I was a passenger on the commercial flights. The flight, going into flight, like I told my friend in East Hartford, he wanted to show me the area from the air. I says, well, look, I'll tell you, when I first got into when I was in the Naval Air Arm, the first week of flight, I got airsick every damn time I went up. And finally, the instructor told me, he says, Joe, he says, you're not airsick, you're getting nervous. You know, I'd sit at the paddle. He says, you're nervous and you're getting sick from it. So after that happened, I never got airsick again.
You think it was because you were nervous?
Perhaps it was subconsciously. You know, sitting on a panel, you know, you get inundated with all this instrumentation, and you got to look at it, jot it down, and transfer that input. It was a chore, and but after that, I never got airsick again. But when I took this local hop, I told this guy, I said, look, when I want you to land, I want you to land because I'm getting nauseated. Sure enough, I got sicker than hell over Hartford. I said, once again, there was a nervous reaction. Well, I try to keep this piper clean by sticking my head out and upchucking on the outside. And Christ, when you do that, you get the backlash back in your face. I said, oh, brother. I gave him hell when we landed. I said, you son of a bee, I told you to not get too far away. If I start to get nauseated, I want you to land. He never did. He wanted to show me Weathersfield.
Well, you had to get your sea legs back again.
Yep.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't covered in this interview?
I don't think so. I think we covered it all. We skimmed the tops of a lot of activity here.
Well, Joe, I'd like to thank you for your service and thank you for your interview.